Welcome back to the Explicit Measures Podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back.
Good morning and a happy Tuesday, gentlemen.
Just jumping right in today, our main topic for today, we'll be talking about the most underrated features around Fabric. So there's a lot of features that have been released from Fabric. Are there any that we feel like are greatly underused, or we should jump in with a particular feature and start learning about it? So that being said, let's get into some just quick introductions or topics or links that we found over the last week or so that are interesting to us. So Seth, I think you found a really interesting topic that we should discuss here, and I think this is us trying to understand more of what's happening here in the Microsoft Fabric ecosystem. The link will be down in the description. Yeah, take it away. What did you find this week?
Mike, let me take it away.
Go ahead.
I am by no means an expert across the whole ecosystem of now what is Fabric, because we went from analytics to all of the engines and conglomerating them together. However, this one struck me as a good enhancement. So as of the 26th, Steve Howard had a post saying that data warehouse SKU guardrails for burstable capacity. Now, the interesting follow-up question to this is, which I'll start with instead of actually talking about it. That's odd.
Sure.
First and foremost, what is the SKU guardrail? So up to this point, we've had the option of saying, hey, I want you to expand my capacity units of consumption. And then for those times where I might have a spike in my effort, fine, that's great. However, cost is a concern, right?
Yep.
But then there's this smoothing. We'll smooth it across the 24 hours as opposed to just making, it a chunk that you're going to extremely pay for right away. It's kind of okay. But this is now a third piece to that puzzle where we actually have an option now to say, I want to set a guardrail. And this introduces kind of a throttle to that burstable capacity, right? So the example that they use in the article is if they're using an F8 and the workload runtime is 3 hours without any burstable capacity. If you implemented burstable capacity, you'd be done in 5 minutes because it used 294 CUs instead of 8. And hey, who doesn't like fast data? I do.
Sure.
I don't like having to answer to the finance department, but hey, 5 minutes is great. For those of us who do have to answer, and by the way, that's everybody. What happens when you put in this SKU guardrail and it uses bursting, but it caps it at 49 CUs, so it's 30 minutes. So what I don't know, and I'd be interested in your guys' take too on this, is this specific to just the warehouse SKUs? Is it across all the capacity within Fabric if I'm using a data lake, or it's interesting. It's a good feature. It raises more questions about other parts of the ecosystem that I'm not completely familiar with. But anyway, I liked seeing it implemented.
So I think this is an interesting challenge. Let's talk about the challenge that I think Microsoft is trying to solve. And I think this is trying to be solved across every kind of tool, honestly. I mean, I don't think if you're loading things through data flows, you're going to have the same problem. If you're loading things through Spark engines and you're running a Spark job at one point in time, you're going to have the same kind of issue. So I think the core concept here is, look, we're trying to sell you software as a service. So you're going to get a paid amount of compute time, right? And everything, I think, as I've heard it explained to me from Microsoft, everything you do in PowerBI.com is related to the amount of cores or the compute time it takes you to do something on a processor. So some workloads are very easy to parallelize. Spark, data warehousing, they're built in a parallel way, so they can run the same query across multiple compute engines to return your result quickly. So I think you're just playing the game here of, in a normal day on a normal company with these compute capacities, there's always these spikes. There's always periods of time where there's a high usage and then it goes away. And I think what Microsoft is identifying is most companies need to pay for enough capacity to handle that high capacity spike but then ramp back down to a reasonable cost for the rest of the time. Because it doesn't make sense to have, and I think maybe this is where we're seeing in the on-prem world, you always had a hard upper limit, right? In on-prem, you had to buy the number of cores to make sure you ran your job. And you would buy like, okay, what do we think our max load will be? And then we'll buy 50% more or, 150%. So that way, you can handle those large loads.
And the problem was inverse, right? Like because you had to choose that capacity, you were always combating how fast you could do stuff.
Correct.
Right? So it was
Yes.
always a time issue
Yes.
where I'd love to do it faster, but
Yep.
I can't. Well, let's
Exactly.
fix that. Okay.
Let's buy a bigger machine.
It's going
buy
to
more
take
cores.
at least 3 weeks.
Exactly. So, but
in the
but
meantime,
now,
what can we delete?
yeah, and exactly. So this is where I think the challenge or the interesting capability of cloud starts showing up, because now cloud can do it at scale, and you can borrow machines when you want to, and it's just like us developing things as a developer in Azure. Within a couple of minutes, you can just turn something on, and boom, it's there.
Yeah.
So I think this is a lot of addressing that, and I think what Microsoft's trying to do with these new Fabric SKUs is say, look, whether you're using analysis services, Power Query, whatever compute that thing's using, Spark, now the data warehouse, we now have like 4, and now Kusto, I guess, is another one that's in there now, another compute engine that apparently is different than the other ones. I haven't played with Kusto too much, but now we have 5 compute engines that are all vying for core CPU time. And if, in my mind here, I'm thinking going, oh yeah, this does make sense, because it should not matter what kind of compute you need. Microsoft can launch any one of them in real time with automation. And they just need to track how long each one of those things run doing your work. And that's where the F and the CU capacity stuff comes from. Anyways, that's my thought. I feel like in my mind, I have to go back down to the basics of like, let's first think fundamentally about what challenge they're trying to solve. They're trying to solve for, you're buying time on a compute capacity core, and they're trying to handle spikes of usage at certain points in time.
Yeah. Well, but not only that, and the way you're describing the usage of compute is the engines underneath may be different, right? Like we're now combining multiple different services, and it
Exactly
doesn't
right.
matter from our perspective. We don't need to understand the complexity of like, okay, well now we're buying this thing or this
I'm buying
thing
Kusto
or this license, and
Yep.
now we have the reverse problem. Do you have an F SKU for Lake, or do you have an F SKU for Warehouse, or do you have an F SKU for Power BI, or no, you need all 3, and now you need combinations of 6, 12, 19, like at least it's just, no, man, you need one, just one.
Yes.
So that's appreciated, because in the past it wasn't like that.
No, it was not.
And the bursting and the smoothing are only for the SQL endpoint warehouse, so that does not affect anything that I don't think that affects data flows that you'd be doing or pipelines. This is only having to do with the data set and just the warehouse. Well, at least from the bursting.
Which I was like, there's the nuance of the follow-up of like,
yes,
I'd like to see this everywhere.
Right? Like start setting up, like, how much can you set your, so I think your question there is very valid, Seth, right? Talking about the bursting capability, right? We do want bursting to take over, but I don't want to sacrifice so much from the bursting that it starts killing other things, right? The way it's been described to me with the smoothing inside Power BI, as they think about that compute, if you burst for a short period of time, they'll let you have it, and then they borrow from your future core capacity, so your core time, right? So the number of cores you have in the future, they'll borrow from that up to a point. So after like 30 minutes, they'll say, okay, wait a minute, you've been bursting for too long. This is no longer a burst anymore. This is now a job that is running. And at some point they start saying, okay, we're going to start slowing you down. And then if you continue to go heavy usage, then they start failing things. So it kind of makes sense, right? So they're basically saying you are able to borrow a future capacity that you have, that you may or may not be consuming. And then the pattern is you get a short period of time where you get a lot of compute all at once, and then you can start throttling that to back, and then eventually it starts failing, which kind of makes sense, right? You're over consuming the system. Eventually it says, sorry, you can't have that. You're done.
Yep.
And that way, you to start looking at the system and figuring out what's wrong. What are you doing in the compute to start abusing that stuff? So anyways, I'm not sure how this is going to fit. I mean, to your point, Seth, earlier about this whole article, it makes sense for us to be able to allow these computes to stretch out over time. Like if you're doing like batch job processing things overnight in the evenings when people are not on the system, yeah, it totally makes sense. Like don't use all your capacity all at once. Allow it to bursting with some guardrails and say, look, we're not willing to let you run this thing wild for, use everything in 5 minutes, but then instead let the job take longer because there's really not an urgent demand to get the data out right now, right?
Yeah.
Those batch job processing things, it's okay. You can plan around that a bit. So I think that's good from this perspective. Is the guardrails make sense for you not to overconsume too quickly and cause failures or problems or in that short term. That's kind of how I see it.
Or inflate your costs to levels that you didn't want.
Well, but are you though? So this is where I'm wondering about this because in the Spark world and Databricks world, it just keeps eating until it's done. Like it'll just you basically set a maximum number of machines you need to use and say, look, you can have no more than 8, but if the job runs for 8 for 2 days, it will run at 8 for 2 days. But your cost is directly corresponding to how long those 8 machines were running for those 2 days. Fabric's different though, because I'm already buying this set amount of CU or capacity up front. You know what I'm saying? Like, so like to me, this is not a spend issue. This is more of a,
it's not more. Yeah, it's a really good point.
Because I mean, the way I read the article, and that's just my point, is like this is not auto scaling.
It's performance problem.
It's more performance based. Yeah. So it's like, okay. So this is where I think maybe this, to me, this one feels more like, hey, we're trying, if I want to let you, again, I'm being very theoretical here in nature, right? Let's just imagine you have a SQL server or a SQL serverless or the warehouse job or a SQL serverless job running. What if that thing's running at the same time a Spark job ramps up? What if that runs at the same time someone else is consuming an inordinate amount of capacity for whatever reason, right? So now you have, again, we talked earlier about there's 5 different compute engines that are working. What if 3 of them start really consuming very hard? What about the other 2? What did they do? Do you start getting failures in Power BI because someone's running a heavy SQL job?
I'm gonna have to dig into this more. I don't think you're right. I think there's settings that it's like, yes, here's the base level SKU, but if you're gonna use bursting or you're gonna use these things, you're gonna pay more. I'd have to check that.
Yeah, I think what I'm referring to though is if you look at the in the middle of the article, it talks about the smoothing portion, right? There's another Fabric Capacities blog posted earlier this month around talking what is the smoothing that's happening, and I think that's really what I'm speaking more towards is that feature there as well. Anyways, really good topic. I think we're going to talk more about this in the future because there's a lot going on here and potentially more thoughts around how the smoothing stuff will work. I've just got to get my head around it. I'm not quite sure I 100% understand it yet, why we're talking about smoothing when I buy a dedicated capacity. So I got to think about that a bit more.
I know the last thing I would just say is make sure you're using the capacity app because I know they're updating that all the time.
They are pushing a lot of apps out. And that's on AppSource. That's so the capacity metrics app. And you're talking specifically, Tommy, for Fabric, right?
For the Fabric, Microsoft Fabric capacity metrics.
Yeah. See if I can go get that, and I'll make sure I put that in the description here as well. With that sounds like a good transition to our main topic today. So in our main topic today, I think we're going to go talk through what is our main couple features, maybe 1 or 2 features here. Let's talk about some features that we think that are in Fabric today that are underutilized. So let's go through all the list of, Tommy's made us a nice little list of all the features that we can go look at here inside the Fabric environment. We'll kind of just like randomly pick out features that we like. And with that, Tommy, I'll let pick out a feature that you think from Fabric that you think is underrated and we should probably be using more of.
Yeah, and let me just set this up too, because
go ahead. Yeah,
Kurt had a great article that we're probably actually going to do an episode on. Is do you feel overwhelmed by Fabric with so many bells and whistles and features? And they just came out, I think, last week with the October updates, and there are always like 1,000 things on top of either it's a new product or the little enhancements to each thing. But just off of memory, without even looking, I think we have about 25 usable products, and I'm not trying to extend that, just like from Data Wrangler, Data Warehouse, KQL databases, Semantic Link that just came out, notebooks, Delta tables. So all these things are being used. But I think for myself, thinking about this question is, what am I either not focusing on now, or what do I think a lot of organizations are? And that's kind of what I'm going off on. I'm going to start with one, and as kind of just giving the background, and I really think I'm not hearing enough about it, but how cool it is the One Lake File Explorer for Windows.
That's a good point.
And just for kind of the quick,
give us some context. What is this One Lake File Explorer, and where do you get it, and what is this thing you're talking about, Tommy? Let's get some context on that one.
So the One Lake File Explorer just simply is a Windows application. You can get it from the Windows Store, I believe, or obviously from going to the download link in Power BI for Fabric. And what it allows you to do is sync all of your lake houses to your local machine, just in a very similar, exact same way that OneDrive does in SharePoint when you have it synced. But what's really awesome about this is you can add any types of files, images, text, Excel files, and it automatically gets synced back to the lakehouse, which is kind of incredible when you think about the different workloads for teams, especially on if we're dealing with more of the business where it's like, hey, can you just upload that Excel file, rather than us having to go to SharePoint to try to grab some document library. Can be organized, readily available for us in our lakehouse. We can view, and then that's the first part of this. I got another Windows specific one, but I think just having that alone and getting people adopted to that can be so incredible. And you can also see all your files too.
So you're saying the word files here, but let's add some context to what this looks like inside Fabric. So in Fabric, when you create the lakehouse, you get two folders. You get one called files, you get one called tables, correct?
Yes. I don't know if you can see the tables though.
No,
so go ahead, Seth.
It's just
No, this goes, I think, back to our discussion around what is One Lake, and you keep hammering that it's a lake house. This is the other part of that, where just like you have your experience where you're syncing to SharePoint, you're syncing to your OneDrive, it's one lake, right? So within Windows Explorer, these are all different file types that are stored there. It's not Delta tables.
So this is where I want to do this is why I want to dig into this one a bit here.
I get it. From a business, I like this feature too, Tommy, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I totally just because once you set it up, if we talk about lowering the bar for a business user to engage with One Lake, like this is that bar. Like, it's just, oh, okay, this is a thing in my Windows Explorer, just like I've interacted with all of my files ever in the past. Now I can upload everything to this one location, like one place, one everything, whatever. What I'm gonna get blasted on is like, but is it a CSV anymore? But is it a Delta table now? It may be. I don't know how it gets converted.
So I want to point in here a couple of things. So I love what you're bringing a point out here, Tommy. I think that's awesome. I do think this is probably an underrated feature, and really, to your point, Seth, it is OneDrive for your files in the lake. So the equivalent lens of what Microsoft provides to you, when you go to the One Lake or the Lakehouse inside PowerBI.com, you see that there is a files and a files and a table folder in that root area. When you open your One Lake for OneDrive, or the One Lake, whatever the thing, File Explorer, it gives you both. It gives you both the files area, so you could put your CSV, your text files, so it acts like I'm easily able to load things up. So it's acting just like a OneDrive experience, but it also gives you all the table experience. So you also see all of the Parquet files and all of the tables that are there as well. So it's literally just like blob storage. It's just like a blob storage account for all your things.
Yeah,
it's Storage Explorer.
Yeah, it is. It's like, it literally is. Yeah, it's a Storage Explorer.
And let me see my raw stuff.
Yep. But it's kind of nice because there's really no other way that you can so if you think about the equivalent when you use other tools, non-Fabric related, you can always kind of go in and look at the file structure. Like if you're doing Databricks, you can say, oh, here's the table, here's the things inside this area, you can go see the physical files. Well, you couldn't do that without this OneLake File Explorer. There's not an easy. You can't go to a web UI like you can in like Azure. You can't go to a Blob Lake storage and click on File Explorer there and go find your files and see them all there. You have to use this tool, from what I'm aware of, to go interrogate and look at those files.
What I do find interesting is the caveat, and I just ripped over the limitations real quick, is users can't update Office files. So if you load up an XLSX or a PPTX or a DocX, you can't update them.
Oh,
Probably not in the same way, right? It's probably pure file storage and replacement, as opposed to the experience that you have on OneDrive, where you're opening in a browser, you're changing things locally and they auto sync, etc. Like, I wonder how that's working in that space. Tom,
you sure about that? Because I'm looking at a few
I'm
things
sure
now.
about I'm sure about what I'm reading.
What's the limitation? It says users can't update Office files such as XLSX, PowerPoint, document,
Word,
DocX
PowerPoint.
is necessary. Yeah.
So,
Okay, so like, but CSV files you probably could. All right, but well, it's not meant to be the place for PowerPoints, anyways, right? And
well, everything's the PowerPoint for everything,
so let's
right?
talk
If you listen to
about this.
Microsoft.
But let's talk about this for a second, right? Because in the same way that I was just like, oh yeah, all in. I'm a business user. I'm familiar with this experience. That is gonna be a significant difference. If you're used to, dude, come on. If you're used to opening up that Excel file, making changes, and saving it in a OneDrive experience, and it just automatically saves, is that experience the same? Can I pop open the Excel file and save it back? It certainly seems that it's like I can't update those files. So am I updating locally and then replacing the file out there?
well, okay. First off,
This is your feature you brought up.
Yeah,
Come on, don't you have these answers, Tommy?
No. I always turn auto save off on my all my products, and then because
Tommy's still old school.
This is very old school kind of thing, because I would just need to make sure. I don't know why. Second off, we have OneDrive already, so this is for data. This is meant for your data, for people to upload data sets. OneDrive is meant for plain fun. And all the other things people do.
Fun.
And again, there's a lot of stuff that people probably don't need to see here. Like they've really updated this. I can see every data flow artifact as a Parquet file, like the backup you can do. I can see all the warehouse definitions, everything in the Lakehouse, the demos that we did for baseball. I have the CSV files I uploaded, and everything else has been translated, whether it's the data flow, Lakehouse, or SQL endpoint. So it is Storage Explorer that I don't know why Azure still doesn't have a way to sync on your computer. But now you have that access to finally easily get there and then view it online as well.
So I think this is a good feature. I think it would be very useful here. I just get so nervous when anyone thinks, oh yeah, I'm just going to build a bunch of Excel files and they'll be my source for my data. Like this just rubs everything that I'm like my core of everything around the wrong way. I'm like, this is just not the right way to think about doing data engineering things in the future here. But I could definitely see the use case and the value here as well. So I think it's a pretty solid feature by itself. Not sure I would super endorse it for gluing and storing your data yet. I mean, I do like the fact that I can see it in there, and I do like the fact that I can go observe what's happening in my Delta tables.
It's also great for ad hoc stuff too. Like, do you go into Storage Explorer and like manufacture and build all your? No, it's just like do my files exist today? Did they process? Did something go wrong?
Exactly. Yeah,
and
totally agree
occasionally, like, oh, I need to load up this CSV because I need to like do some temp work and whatever the case may be. Super, super useful in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, most of the stuff for this feature is just supposed to be seamless. It's just supposed to act just like a normal. I mean, it's supposed to be like blob storage, really, basically. At the end of the day, it's a new API layer called OneLake that acts almost the same as
typical and you're
blob
removing
storage
some
accounts.
Barriers by putting into Windows Explorer, so it's not a separate install.
I think I'd agree with that one. And I think they just mentioned in the bottom of the article. I think it said something about the idea you should be able to online view it. Apparently, they said, I'm looking at the bottom of the article here, Tommy, that I find interesting. Open option to open workspace as an item on the web portal. And actually go to OneLake, and there's now a right click on the workspace, select OneLake View Workspace Online. It opens the workspace browser in the Fabric portal. So there's like, it's supposed to kind of like help you get back and forth between, where the files you store locally and then hopping into that same OneLake inside Fabric as well. So it's interesting to like see how you're able to move back and forth between desktop and the files there as well.
Yeah, maybe I misspoke. Like it shows that there's this edit file experience that if you're trying to open it, you can change it locally and then save and it syncs. So I don't quite know what that limitation was talking about.
It seems contradictory based on the documentation,
unless it's like the browser, users can't update Office files. And then,
maybe they're talking like like Tommy's point, right? It doesn't auto synchronize your file.
Yeah.
Like if you had a Word or a PowerPoint open, it's not auto saving back to that location for you. You have to physically shut down the file and let the OneDrive sync itself.
I'm sorry. It does explicitly call it out down there in edit files that it doesn't support updating those Office files.
Okay.
Nope, there's consistency. Sorry.
Okay. Move on. Other things of Fabric that are being underutilized. I'll throw one here into the mix here that I think is pretty underutilized in general, and this might be more of a nuancy thing, just because I like the experience of it. I think Data Wrangler inside the Power Query experience or inside the Spark Notebook experience, is something that's kind of underutilized. I've seen a couple people blogging about it every so often, and I actually hear a lot of people say, "Well, I already from the hardcore developers, they already know how to write Python," and so they're like, "Oh, I'm not really interested in writing my own pandas functions here. I actually know how to write it," and they just handwrite it themselves. But I think for a lot of new users getting into the Spark experience, it'll be very helpful for them to have code auto-generated for you. So I think that is a very neat feature. I like the idea that it can do a lot of data cleaning for you without having the UI around it. Like I just think it feels very Power Query-esque to me. And I think it's a great barrier removal for anyone starting to get into that Spark Notebook area. So I could probably give my vote here for the Data Wrangler experience. Any thought? Have you guys used that one? I know, Tommy, you've played around with it a little bit. Any thoughts around that one from your side?
I really do. I like it, but honestly, like it's a really neat feature, but I don't see it really be part of like the pure dev side. Like it's nice to easily summarize something. I still think there's a lot more features that are needed there. And like you and I were doing this, and I've tried to do a few other examples. You're like, okay, I can do some simple things.
Yes.
But now I have to write some code, and now I'm completely taken out on. I have no idea where that like language is coming from.
Yeah, it feels like it needs maybe something else while you're inside that editor experience of adding a custom step where you are able to add your own custom code for a particular step or not. It would be really useful if they were able to produce that, and maybe it's already there. Do you know, Tommy, have they incorporated some kind of like AI inside Data Wrangler? Because that would be really useful, because you could describe what you want to do with the data, and it could try to generate Python or Pandas code for you and say, here's the step we think you would want to use to translate that. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, and not yet. And I think that's probably going to come out once Copilot and Notebooks come out.
That's probably another thing we should talk about eventually as well. What would you say? Yeah, Copilot maybe.
Copilot, all the things.
It's like everywhere now. It's supposed to like they're really pushing the Copilot pieces.
Yeah. I think in general, like probably not every time we talk about Fabric, I think, well, this might be slightly off topic, but one feature that I'm extremely excited about implementing in a larger scale is the shortcuts. And I think people should know about that too. Like even though we're talking about features people may or may not know about. So shortcuts are the ability, and they just implemented this for all the Dataverse artifacts as well, right? Like not long ago. So Dynamics 365, all the etc. Well, but essentially what it's allowing you to do is through OneLake create a connection to a source of data without extracting the data and pulling it into OneLake, and this goes cross cloud, which is what I needed, right? So that's multi-tenant, touching Delta Parquet files in different platforms, different things, Dataverse, etc. Like that's going to be a huge win for how I have to work and operate. And I think removing not only some of the complexities for organizations of where their data sits, but saving money on data movement charges. But also, one of the things I was thinking about recently was like, and I have to dive into the particulars of it, but it also seems to solve the GDPR things, where
Yes.
data can't be
In a certain region.
in certain regions,
Yep.
where I still can maintain continuity across my analytical platforms where I need to access data, but I'm not actually moving or extracting from places where now there are regulations around me doing that. So it's a phenomenal feature that people should know about, and definitely play with regarding, implementing their solutions within OneLake and Fabric.
I think this is a huge adopter feature as well. So from one who comes from the world of making lots of Delta tables already, I was very impressed with being able to create Delta tables outside of Fabric in other tools that I like.
Yeah.
Fabric is definitely coming a long way. It's adding so many tools together, but I think many people would agree in the space of doing data engineering, there's just certain tools that are better than Fabric at this point.
Yeah.
Fabric hasn't caught up yet. I mean, it's brand new, so
the benefit
it makes sense.
the benefit of that too, though, is that means we can continue to build and innovate in those tool sets, knowing that we can leverage those artifacts in Fabric at a later date when we need to productionalize.
So let me give you just a really common pattern in a lakehouse that works really well, and I have many installs of this already just deployed, and I'm deploying more of them, is you use Azure Synapse to run a pipeline. The pipeline connects to the data you care about, API, structured tables, doesn't matter. The API pulls the data in and makes your initial tables in your lakehouse. You use another engine like Databricks to pick up that data and transform it, shape it, get it ready to go. And then you would go back to Synapse and say, in Synapse, here's a view of the data, the SQL Server view, and then you can go hit that view with Power BI. So basically you have Synapse doing a lot of the collecting of data and then serving the data back to Power BI. Power BI just bolts on really easy with the SQL endpoint. Great, everything's happy. Now you flip this mindset. Now with Fabric, you don't need the pipeline to be in a separate tool. The pipeline can just be part of your Fabric environment. You can do your processing of that data because now it's just an endpoint, a OneLake storage account, which is like Data Lake Gen 2. So you can still manipulate that data just like you would normally, and you don't even have to put the lakehouse in the lake. You could actually have a separate Data Lake Gen 2 storage that's separate from all of this, right? It could be somewhere else in your environment. And then once you build those tables, you can now ditch the whole SQL Server endpoint if you need to. You could still use it if you want, but now you can go directly with the shortcut right back into your Power BI data sets. And now there's no refreshing. Now the data set knows how to read that Parquet file immediately. I mean, there's a lot of advantages, I think, with going around this pattern. So I'm really excited about that new pattern. Working on some projects right now to kind of test out the capabilities of that, which I think I'm finding very good success with it already. Really like this pattern. So I think shortcuts is another big win that people aren't using. Any other items, Tommy, you would want to pick out here that would be?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing with shortcuts is is this still underrated when it's probably the most important feature?
I made a caveat. I'm not saying it's the most underrated. I'm saying that if we're talking to an audience who doesn't normally may not know a lot about Fabric, I think it is one of those things that you absolutely want to be aware of.
No, I mean, I think everyone is aware of it. To me, it's like it's one of those. Yes, it's probably one of the most valued, but
Tommy.
I don't know if it's the most underrated.
Sorry, Tommy.
What?
I'm sorry that I did not pick an underrated feature.
Okay.
Do you have any? Do you have any actual underrated features you'd like to share with the audience before we have to close?
Well, I'm gonna go back to your comment though, Tommy. Like, I think people may be aware of the feature. Are people actually testing it out? And do people really understand the impact of what a shortcut could do? I think I agree with Seth on that part. I think the idea that there's a lot of companies that have data sitting in AWS somewhere. I think there's another part of this that is people maybe are aware of it, but I don't think people are aware of how to actually implement it or use it into a current work stream or workflow they have today. So maybe from that perspective, I would give it a bit more credit. I do think it's kind of underrated. I think many people are looking at Fabric going, well, I got to build everything there now. I got to throw away all my old work that I did, and now I got to move over to Fabric. And I think that's not the case. I want to be, it's a little bit more nuanced around that, where you can selectively pick specific projects and bring over the data that you care about. So I still think the shortcuts is a underrated feature, just from a fact of I don't think people have really tapped into its full potential yet and understand how impactful this will be, and potentially how much time it will save them, because they don't have to rebuild anything. You can just connect to your existing stuff. So if you're already a Delta builder of Delta tables somewhere else, Delta's amazing the shortcuts are amazing because now you just bolt into what you've already done. If you've been doing 2 years of engineering work on tables, great, just reuse it. That's huge. I don't think people really grasp that yet.
I think you're right, because I know it's one of the most important features. It's not hidden, you know what I mean?
Totally
But
agree.
it's probably,
Yes.
but that doesn't mean that it really needs to be like 100% of lake houses have to have some type of shortcuts, or like at least thinking about that. That honestly, the way shortcuts are in terms of the architecture of how you build your lake houses, like that's a completely like critical part. It's not just a nice side gig, if that makes sense. Like shortcuts dictate how we're going to frame and build our lake houses.
Yes. I think it's less about how do you build it moving forward. I think it's more about integrating with what you've already built, right? How quickly can we get, to me, the scenario is how quickly can I build the data engineering stuff that I like, and how quickly can I get that into Power BI data sets as fast as possible? So to me, this is like a really good hook for those people or the teams that already have data engineering on them. And again, I'll say it again, like I've said since Fabric came out, Fabric is amazing for business users because you're getting all these new tools you've never had before. Fabric is okay for data engineers and data scientists because they already have tools, and what they're getting with Fabric is a little bit less capable than what they already have. So I feel like there's this idea of eventually Fabric will get there where data scientists and data engineers will feel as comfortable there. The gap will close, and you'll be like, oh, wow, there's all these extra features inside Fabric that I want to use that are better than what I had previously. So I think the tighter they can pull that integration between reporting, engineering of data science things together, the better I think the teams will want to work together. But you really do have specific or different teams that need the same stuff over and over again. All right, with that, I think we've burned through a perfectly good hour of your time. Well, maybe a little less than an hour this time. This is a bit of a shorter episode, but we do want to say thank you. We hope you've liked our recommendations for things that are underrated inside Fabric, particularly around shortcuts, Data Wrangler, and the One Lake File Explorer, kind of our picks for underrated features that you should maybe spend a little bit more time learning about and trying to use them. And with that, we only ask, if you like this episode, please recommend it to somebody else. Let somebody else know you found some value from it. It really helps get the word out and lets other people learn more about Fabric and Power BI and the data ecosystem that we love so dearly. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find the podcast anywhere that it's available, on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. If you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to Power BI Tips/podcast and leave a rating. It helps us out.
Awesome.
And then,
that's it.
We'll leave it at that.
That's good enough. Awesome. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.